They said Julian Sterling never lost. They said the man who invented the quantum link processor could calculate 10 steps ahead of God himself. But on a rainy Tuesday in Manhattan, inside the most exclusive club in the world, Julian Sterling made the biggest mistake of his life. He didn't lose his fortune to a rival CEO. He didn't lose his reputation to a scandal. He lost his ego to a 24-year-old waitress named James, who was just trying to pay her rent. He bet her $50,000 that she couldn't last 10 moves. He had no idea he was sitting across from a ghost. This is the story the billionaires don't want you to know. The air inside the obsidian room always smelled the same: old leather, single malt scotch, and the metallic tang of anxiety. Located in the basement of the Pierre Hotel on Fifth Avenue, it wasn't the kind of place you found on Google Maps. You didn't make a reservation here. You were invited, or you owned the building. James Jenkins adjusted the collar of her stiff black vest, trying to ignore the ache in her lower back. It was 11:45 p.m. She had been on her feet for 10 hours. Her apron was heavy with the weight of her ordering pad and a few crumpled $5 bills. Tips were notoriously bad on strategy nights. Strategy night was a tradition for the city's elite. The titans of industry, hedge fund managers, tech moguls, oil tycoons, didn't come here to drink. They came to play chess. But not the friendly kind. They played for stakes that could buy a house in the suburbs. "James, table 4 needs a refill. Now!" The hiss came from Rick, the floor manager. Rick was a man who sweated profusely, even when standing still. He treated the waitstaff like furniture and the patrons like gods. "On it, Rick," James murmured, keeping her head down. That was the rule. Be invisible. James walked toward table 4 with a crystal pitcher of water. She moved with a practiced fluidity, learned from 3 years of dodging groping hands and flying champagne corks. At table 4 sat the room's center of gravity, Julian Sterling. Julian was 42, handsome in a shark-like way, with eyes that seemed to strip mine you for data. He was the founder of Sterling Dynamics, a man who had famously shorted the housing market in 2023 and walked away with $2 billion in a single afternoon. Tonight, Julian was bored. He was lounging in a high-backed velvet chair, swirling a glass of Macallan 25. Across from him sat Arthur Calloway, a real estate developer who was sweating through his bespoke Armani suit. Between them lay a chessboard made of ebony and ivory. James poured the water into Calloway's glass, her eyes inadvertently flickering down to the board. It was a mess. Calloway was playing white, but he had overextended his knights. Julian, playing black, had set up a classic Sicilian defense, specifically the Nagdorf variation. It was aggressive, sharp, but Calloway had just made a fatal error. He had moved his bishop to g5. "Don't look," James told herself. "Just pour the water and leave." But she couldn't help it. Her grandfather's voice echoed in the back of her mind. "Look at the lines, James. The board breathes. If you listen, it will tell you where it hurts." Calloway was about to walk into a mating net. If Julian moved his rook to c3, the game was effectively over in 4 moves. James finished pouring. She stepped back, clutching the pitcher. "Check," Julian said. His voice was smooth, like velvet dragged over gravel. Calloway cursed under his breath. "Give me a minute, Julian." "Take an hour, Arthur. The result will be the same." Julian smirked, lighting a cigar, ignoring the no-smoking sign that applied to everyone except him. James turned to leave, but her shoe, a cheap, rubber-soled sneaker mandated by the uniform policy, squeaked loudly against the polished marble floor. Julian's head snapped up. For the first time all night, he looked at her, really looked at her, not as a waitress, but as an interruption. "You," Julian said. James froze. "Sir?" "You sighed," Julian said. He wasn't smiling. "When Arthur moved his bishop, you let out a sigh. Why?" The room went quiet. The other tables, occupied by men worth billions, stopped their conversations to watch the alpha predator toy with the help. "I didn't mean to disturb you, Mr. Sterling," James said, her grip tightening on the pitcher. "I have a cold. It was just a breath." "Liar!" Julian stood up. He was tall, looming over the table. "I track micro-expressions for a living, darling. That wasn't a cold. That was disgust." He walked around the table, circling her. "You looked at the board, you saw his move, and you sighed, which implies an opinion." Rick, the manager, materialized out of thin air, looking terrified. "Mr. Sterling, is this girl bothering you? James, get back to the kitchen immediately." "Quiet, Rick," Julian snapped, not looking away from James. "I asked her a question." He leaned in close to James, smelling of expensive tobacco and arrogance. "Do you play chess, Waitress?" James looked into his eyes. She thought about her rent, which was 2 weeks late. She thought about her sister, Mia, sitting in a hospital room in Queens, waiting for a specialist they couldn't afford. She thought about the dusty chess books under her bed. Books written in Russian, authored by a man the world had forgotten. "I know how the pieces move," James whispered. Julian laughed. It was a cold, barking sound. "She knows how the pieces move. Did you hear that, Arthur? The waitress knows the rules." The room erupted in polite, sycophantic laughter. "Tell you what," Julian said, reaching into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a money clip and peeled off a crisp stack of $100 bills. He tossed it onto the chessboard, scattering the pieces. "That's $5,000. Sit down." "Sir, I can't." "Sit down." Julian's voice cracked like a whip. "Arthur, get up. She's taking your seat." Arthur Calloway scrambled up, relieved to escape his inevitable defeat. He gestured for James to take the chair. "Mr. Sterling, please," Rick pleaded. "She's on the clock. This is highly irregular." "I'm buying her time," Julian said. $5,000 for one game. If she lasts more than 10 minutes, she keeps the money. If she loses before then, she's fired. Julian looked at Rick. "Do we have a deal?" Rick looked at James, then at the billionaire. "Yes, Mr. Sterling." James felt the blood drain from her face. This wasn't a game. This was her livelihood. If she lost her job. If she won, $5,000 could pay for Mia's meds for 3 months. She set the water pitcher down on a side table. She smoothed her apron. She sat down in the velvet chair. It was still warm from Calloway's fear. "What's your name?" Julian asked, resetting the board with lightning speed. "James." "Well, James." Julian smiled, a predator showing his teeth. "I'm going to destroy you, but don't worry, I'll make it quick." The atmosphere in the obsidian room shifted. It wasn't just a game anymore. It was a spectacle. Men in 3-piece suits gathered around the table, holding their tumblers of whiskey, whispering bets. "I give her 12 moves," one whispered. "Generous. I say he mates her in 8. It's Julian Sterling." Julian gestured to the white pieces. "Ladies first. Try not to embarrass yourself too badly." James looked at the board. The 64 squares seemed to expand, filling her vision. For a moment, she wasn't in a high-end club in Manhattan. She was back in the tiny, smoke-filled kitchen in Brooklyn, sitting across from her grandfather, Nikolai. "Control the center, little bird," Nikolai would say, his fingers stained with nicotine. "The center is the heart. If you hold the heart, the body dies." James reached out. Her hand trembled slightly, just enough for Julian to notice and smirk. She pushed her pawn to E4. "Standard," Julian drawled. "Boring." He instantly responded with C5, the Sicilian defense again. He was testing her, seeing if she would fall into the same traps Arthur Calloway had. James played her knight to f3. Julian played d6. James played d4. The opening moves flew by. Julian played fast, impossibly fast. He slammed his pieces down with force, a psychological tactic designed to intimidate. Bang, bang, bang. He wasn't thinking, he was reciting. He had memorized thousands of games. He was a computer in a human suit. James played slower. She hesitated. She fumbled a little when moving her bishop to c4, almost knocking over a pawn. "Careful," Julian mocked. "Don't hurt yourself." The crowd chuckled. By move 12, the board looked complicated. To the untrained eye, Julian was dominating. He had developed his pieces aggressively. His queen was prowling the middle of the board, looking for blood. James's position looked cramped. Her pieces were clustered together, seemingly passive. "You're playing like a turtle," Julian said, taking a sip of his scotch. "Hiding in your shell. You know you can't win by hiding, right?" "I'm not hiding," James said softly. "Oh? Then what are you doing?" Julian moved his knight to g4, threatening her king's side. It was a brutal, attacking move. "Because to me, it looks like you're dying." James stared at the board. The crowd was getting restless. They wanted the kill. They wanted to see the billionaire crush the waitress so they could go back to their business, their world order reaffirmed. But James saw something they didn't. Julian was arrogant. His arrogance made him blind. He was so focused on hunting her king that he had left his back door open. It was a subtle weakness, a hairline fracture in his defense, caused by his knight move. "When the wolf bares his teeth," her grandfather used to say, "he exposes his throat." James reached for her queen. The crowd gasped. Bringing the queen out this early against a player like Julian was suicide. It was a beginner's mistake. "Bad move," Arthur Calloway whispered from the sideline. James moved her queen to d3. Julian blinked. He frowned. He hadn't expected that. It seemed like a passive block, a desperate attempt to defend against his knight. "Delaying the inevitable," Julian muttered. He pushed his pawn to h5, launching an all-out assault on her king. "Checkmate is in 5 moves, James. You might want to start polishing your resume." James didn't answer. She just watched his hand. He was so confident. He was looking at her king. He wasn't looking at the diagonal line she had just opened up for her bishop. The trap was set. It wasn't a trap found in the modern textbooks. It was an old Soviet trap, a variation of the Lasker trap, something that hadn't been played in high-level chess since the 1960s. Julian looked at his watch. "Bored now. Let's finish this." He reached for his rook. "Wait," James said. Julian paused, his hand hovering over the piece. "Giving up?" "No." James looked up, her eyes clear and sharp. The trembling in her hands was gone. "I just wanted to ask, did you really mean it? About the money?" Julian laughed, playing to the crowd. "Of course. 5,000 cash. Why? Do you think you've earned it?" "No," James said. "I mean, can we raise the stakes?" The room went dead silent. Even the bartender stopped wiping a glass. Julian slowly pulled his hand back. His eyes narrowed. The predator had just realized the mouse wasn't running. "Excuse me?" 5,000 is a lot to me, James said, her voice steady. "But it's nothing to you. You spend that on a bottle of wine. If I'm going to lose my job tonight, I want it to be worth it." Julian leaned forward, intrigued for the first time. "What do you have in mind?" "If I win," James said, "you pay me $50,000. The crowd erupted in murmurs. Insane. "She's crazy. She's going to get destroyed." "And if you lose?" Julian asked, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You don't have $50,000, James. You have an apron and bad shoes." "If I lose," James said, swallowing hard, "I'll work for you, for free, for a year. Whatever you want. Cleaning your house, washing your cars, indentured servitude." Julian studied her. He loved high stakes. He was a gambler at heart. The idea of owning a person's time, of humiliating someone who dared to challenge him, was intoxicating. "Rick!" Julian shouted without looking away from James. "Get the notary. We're writing a contract." He smiled, a cruel, wide smile. "You're on, James. 50,000 or a year of your life. Make your move." The contract was signed on a cocktail napkin, witnessed by Rick and Arthur Calloway. The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. Julian returned to the board. His demeanor changed. He was no longer playing casually. He was playing to kill. He analyzed the board, looking for the trick. He checked the diagonals, the files, the knight forks. He saw nothing. Her position still looked cramped. Her queen on d3 looked vulnerable. "She's bluffing," Julian thought. "She's trying to psych me out. It's a poker play." "You have a poker face, I'll give you that," Julian said. He grabbed his rook and slammed it down to h3. "But math doesn't care about bluffs. Check." James's king was under fire. She had to move. She slid her king to f1. "Running away," Julian taunted. He brought his queen into the attack. "Check again." James blocked with a knight. "And again," Julian pressed. He was relentless. He was stripping away her defenses, piece by piece. The crowd was cheering him on now. They wanted to see the waitress humbled. They wanted to see the hierarchy restored. James was down 2 pawns and a bishop. It looked hopeless. "Give up," Julian said. "Save yourself the embarrassment of the final mate. I'll let you be my personal assistant. You can make my coffee." James didn't respond. She was counting. 1, 2, 3. She needed him to move his queen 1 more square to the left. Just 1 square. "Your move, James." Julian checked his watch. "I have a flight to Tokyo in 3 hours." James moved her rook to b1. It looked like a blunder. A terrible, horrible blunder. It left her entire back rank exposed. Julian's eyes lit up. "Gotcha!" He didn't hesitate. He swooped his queen down to take the rook. "Checkmate in 2. You should have taken the 5,000 when you had the Clack. The sound of James's piece hitting the board cut him off. While Julian was busy capturing her rook, he had removed his queen from the defense of his own king. He had been so focused on his attack, he forgot the first rule of chess. Every move creates a weakness. James had moved her knight, not to defend, but to f3. "Check," James said. Julian froze. He looked at the board. "Check? That's just a nuisance check. I'll just take your knight with my—" He stopped. His hand hovered over the board. His eyes darted from square to square. The blood slowly drained from his face, leaving him pale and ghostly. If he took the knight with his pawn, his king was exposed to James's bishop, the one she had positioned 20 minutes ago. If he moved his king, he walked into a queen smothermate. He looked for an escape route. There was none. He looked for a block. There was none. The silence in the obsidian room was absolute. You could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the bar. Julian Sterling, the man who calculated 10 steps ahead of God, had been trapped, not by a grandmaster, not by a computer, but by a waitress who smelled like bleach and cheap soap. "It's not checkmate," Julian whispered, his voice trembling. "It's not—" "No," James said softly. "It's forced mate in 4. Do you want me to play it out?" Julian stared at the board. His brain was racing, replaying the game. How? When? Then he saw it. The queen moved to d3. It hadn't been a block. It had been a lure. She had baited him. She had fed him pieces like breadcrumbs, leading him exactly where she wanted him. He looked up at her. The invisible waitress was gone. In her place sat someone else. Her posture was straight, her eyes were burning with a terrifying intelligence. "Who are you?" Julian whispered. "James Jenkins," she said. "No," Julian shook his head. "James Jenkins is a waitress. You play like a ghost. I've seen this style before. Aggressive but fluid. Sacrificial. It's Soviet." James stiffened. "Where did you learn to play?" Julian demanded, his voice rising. The shame of losing was being replaced by shock. "My grandfather taught me," James said quietly. "Who is your grandfather?" "It doesn't matter. He's dead." James stood up. She looked at the napkin contract on the table. "You owe me $50,000, Mr. Sterling, and I'd like to cash out now, please. My shift is over." She turned to leave, but Julian slammed his hand on the table, knocking the king to the floor. "No!" Julian shouted. "Nobody leaves. You hustled me." "I didn't hustle you," James said calmly. "You challenged me. You set the terms." "It's impossible." Julian turned to the crowd, looking for support. "She's cheating. She has to be using an engine. Look at her ear. Is she wearing an earpiece?" He lunged toward her, grabbing her arm. "Don't touch me," James snapped, pulling away. "Search her," Julian yelled at Rick. "She has a device. Nobody beats Julian Sterling like that. She's a fraud." "Mr. Sterling, please," Rick stammered. "I said search her." Suddenly, a slow clapping started from the back of the room. Clap, clap, clap. Everyone turned. Standing in the shadows of the VIP booth was an old man with white hair and thick glasses. It was Victor Kaminsky, a retired grandmaster and one of the most respected chess historians in the world. He rarely spoke, but when he did, everyone listened. Victor walked forward, leaning on his cane. He stopped at the table and looked down at the board. He studied the position for a long moment, then looked at James. "She is not cheating, Julian," Victor said, his Russian accent thick. "I watched the whole game. The girl plays with the soul of a master." Victor looked James in the eyes. "Jenkins, that is your name?" "Yes," James said. "That is an American name," Victor said. "But you play the vulgar gambit like a man I knew 40 years ago. A man who vanished from Moscow in 1985. His name was Nikolai Volkov." James's breath hitched. She took a step back. "You have his eyes," Victor whispered. "Is it true? Are you the granddaughter of the Iron Wolf?" The name Nikolai Volkov hung in the air like smoke. James took a step back, clutching her apron. She had spent her entire life hiding that name. Her mother had changed it to Jenkins when they arrived in Brooklyn in the 90s, terrified that the old enemies of the Soviet chess machine would find them. Nikolai wasn't just a chess player. He was a political symbol, a man who had defied the Kremlin on the world stage and paid the ultimate price: erasure. "My name is James Jenkins," she repeated, though her voice lacked the steel it held moments ago. "And I don't know what you're talking about." Victor Kaminsky, the old grandmaster, chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "You can change your passport, devushka, girl, but you cannot change your chess. The way you sacrificed the pawn on d4, that was Volkov's signature. We called it the Ghost Gambit. Only 3 people in the world knew how to play it correctly. 2 are dead. You are the 3rd. Julian Sterling was watching this exchange with the intensity of a hawk spotting a field mouse. The rage in his eyes had vanished, replaced by something far more dangerous: calculation. Julian was a billionaire because he knew how to pivot. When the market crashed, he bought. When a rival defeated him, he acquired them. He looked at the checkmate on the board, then at James's terrified face, and finally at the awe-struck crowd. He saw an opportunity. "So," Julian said, straightening his cuffs, "you're not just a waitress. You're royalty." "I'm a waitress who just won a bet," James said, her hands shaking again. "Please, just give me the money. I have to go." Julian walked back to the table. He picked up the napkin contract. He held it up to the light, smiling. "This contract," Julian began, "was between Julian Sterling and James Jenkins, a novice. But you are a hustler, James. You misrepresented your skill level. In the legal world, that's called fraud." "I didn't lie," James cried. "You asked if I knew the rules. I said yes. You omitted material facts," Julian said smoothly. He ripped the napkin in half, then in half again. He dropped the confetti-like pieces onto the marble floor. "The bet is void." The blood roared in James's ears. "You can't do that. You have billions. That money saves my sister's life." The room went quiet. James realized she had said too much. Julian froze. He took a step closer to her, invading her personal space. "Your sister, is she sick?" James bit her lip, looking away. "That's none of your business." "Everything is my business," Julian whispered. He turned to Rick. "Get my car, and get James's coat. She's coming with me." "I'm not going anywhere with you," James snapped. "Really?" Julian pulled out his phone. He tapped the screen a few times. "I just looked up Jenkins in the Queen's Hospital registry. Mia Jenkins. Admitted 3 days ago. Acute lymphoblastic leukemia. She needs a bone marrow transplant. But your insurance denied the coverage because it's considered experimental for her specific genetic marker. Cost, $200,000. Immediate down payment required, $50,000. James felt her knees give way. She grabbed the edge of the table to steady herself. How did you?" "I own the insurance company, James," Julian said simply. "I own everything." He leaned in, his voice low, seductive and terrifying. "I won't give you the $50,000 for the game. You cheated. But I will make you a new offer. A job." "I won't be your maid," James hissed. "I don't need a maid. I have 20, Julian smiled. "I need a weapon." He gestured to the chessboard. "Next month is the Continental Open in Las Vegas. The prize pool is $2 million. But more importantly, the winner gets a seat at the candidates tournament in Madrid. I want you to enter." "I haven't played a tournament in 10 years, James said. "I'm rusty. I'm nobody." "You just beat me in 20 moves, Julian countered. "You have the blood of the Iron Wolf. You are the greatest unpolished diamond I've ever seen, and I love polishing diamonds." He checked his watch. "Here is the deal. You play for me, I sponsor you. I pay for the best coaches, the best software, the entry fees. In exchange, you give me 50% of your winnings forever, and—" He paused for effect. "And I pay for Mia's surgery. Tonight. Before we even leave this building, I will make the call." James looked at the man who had just ripped up her winning ticket. He was a monster. He was a shark. But he was holding the only lifeline she had left. She looked at the chessboard, where the pieces lay scattered. She looked at the door, where the rainy New York night awaited her. A world of poverty, debt, and death. "Do I have a choice?" James asked, her voice hollow. "There is always a choice," Julian said, extending his hand. "Checkmate your pride, James, or sacrifice your sister." James looked at his hand. It was manicured, soft and deadly. She reached out and shook it. "When do we start?" "Now," Julian said. "Rick, fire her. She has a plane to catch." The penthouse of the Sterling Tower was less of a home and more of a fortress in the sky. Located on the 90th floor overlooking Central Park, it was all glass, steel, and silence. For the last 3 weeks, this had been James's prison. She hadn't seen Mia. Julian had kept his word. Mia was moved to a private suite at Mount Sinai, the surgery was scheduled, and the best oncologists in the country were attending to her. But part of the deal was James's total isolation. Distraction is the enemy of perfection, Julian had said, confiscating her phone. James sat in the war room, a library filled with chess computers and ancient manuscripts. Across from her sat a team of 3 grandmasters Julian had hired to train her. They were brutal. "Again!" shouted Grandmaster Alistair Thorne, no relation to the forbidden name, just a coincidence of the elite. "You are too sentimental. You are trying to save the night. Let it die." James rubbed her temples. She had been playing for 12 hours straight. "If I sacrifice the knight, I lose control of the F-file. If you don't sacrifice the knight, you lose the game in 20 moves, Alistair snapped. "Your grandfather understood sacrifice. Why don't you?" Nikolai. Even here, she couldn't escape him. Julian walked into the room. He was wearing a silk robe, holding a tablet. He looked like a Roman emperor, surveying his gladiators. "How is she?" Julian asked, ignoring James and addressing the coaches. "She is brilliant but emotional," Alistair reported. "She plays with her heart, not her head. In a street fight, she wins. Against a computer or a disciplined Russian engine. She cracks." Julian walked over to James. He placed a hand on her shoulder. It felt heavy. "The Continental Open starts in 2 days," Julian said. "The press is already going wild. The mystery waitress. The Cinderella of chess. I've built a narrative, James. Don't embarrass me." "I'm tired, Julian," James whispered. "I need to speak to Mia." "Win the first round," Julian said coldly. "Then you can make a phone call." He tapped his tablet. "I have news. The bracket was just released." He swiped the screen and showed her. Round 1. James Jenkins, USA, versus Maximilian Vane, UK. James felt the blood drain from her face. "Vane?" Maximilian Vane was 21 years old, a prodigy known as the Butcher of Brighton. He didn't just beat opponents, he humiliated them. He was known for psychological warfare, whispering insults during matches, tapping his pieces loudly, and mocking his opponents in press conferences. He was currently ranked number 8 in the world. "He's a shark," James said. "He's a bully," Julian corrected. "And you are going to break him." "Why am I paired with a top seed in the first round?" James asked. "I'm unranked. I should be playing a qualifier." Julian smiled, a thin, cruel curving of his lips. "I pulled some strings. I wanted a high-profile match to start. If you beat Vane, you become a legend overnight. The sponsorship deals will triple. And if I lose? Then the surgery funding stops," Julian said. He wasn't joking. "You are an investment, James. Investments must yield returns." He leaned down, whispering in her ear. "Vane has a weakness. He hates the unexpected. He studies databases. He knows every game played in the last 50 years. But he doesn't know you. He doesn't know the ghost gambit." "I can't play that," James said. "It's too risky." "You have no choice." Julian straightened up. "Pack your bags. We're going to Vegas." The Las Vegas Convention Center was a cavernous hall filled with the hum of air conditioning and the nervous shuffling of 1,000 chess players. But the main stage was different. It was a boxing ring for intellectuals. Spotlights cut through the darkness, illuminating a single table in the center. Cameras on boom arms swooped overhead. This was the feature match. James sat in her chair, trying to control her breathing. She was wearing a dress Julian had chosen. Navy blue, severe, expensive. It felt like armor. Across from her sat Maximilian Vane. He was slouching, chewing gum, looking utterly bored. He had bleached blonde hair and wore sunglasses indoors. He looked more like a rock star than a chess player. The arbiter stepped forward. "Miss Jenkins, Mr. Vane, shake hands." James extended her hand. Vane looked at it, then looked at her face. He smirked and gave her a limp, wet handshake. "Nice dress," Vane whispered, his British accent dripping with disdain. "Does your owner pick out your underwear too?" James stiffened. "Ignore him. It's what he wants." "Clock start," the arbiter announced. James had the white pieces. She had the first move. The crowd was silent. Millions were watching online. In a hospital room in New York, Mia was watching on an iPad. In the VIP box, Julian Sterling was sipping champagne. "Control the center," her grandfather's voice echoed. James reached out and played E4. Vane instantly slapped down C5. The Sicilian again. They moved fast. The opening was standard, theory, book moves. Vane was playing perfectly, like a machine. He was bored. He was looking around the room, yawning, checking his fingernails. It was a display of utter disrespect. By move 15, James was in trouble. Vane had locked up the center. His bishops were slicing through the board like lasers. She was on the defensive. "You're shaking, love," Vane whispered, leaning over the board. "Go back to waiting tables. You're out of your depth." James looked at the board. He was right. Conventionally, she was losing. Her structure was weak. But then she saw it. The same pattern she had seen with Julian. Vane was so confident in his superior position that he had neglected the safety of his king's flank. He assumed she would play defensively to prolong the game. He assumed she was scared. He didn't know she was a Volkov. James took a deep breath. She closed her eyes for a second. She imagined the smoke-filled kitchen. She imagined Nikolai's rough hands moving the wooden pieces. "Fear is for the living," Nikolai had said. "On the board, we are already dead. So we fight like ghosts." James opened her eyes. The shaking stopped. She reached for her knight on F3. "Time to wake up," she whispered. She sacrificed the knight. She moved it to E5, directly into the line of fire of his pawn. Vane paused. He stopped chewing his gum. He lowered his sunglasses. He looked at the move. It made no sense. It was a blunder, a free piece. He laughed. Desperate. He took the knight. James didn't hesitate. She pushed her H-pawn. H4. Vane frowned. He looked at the board again. Suddenly the geometry shifted. The free knight had opened a line for her rook. The pawn push was opening the door for her queen. It wasn't a blunder. It was the beginning of a mating net. Vane sat up straight. The boredom vanished. He started to calculate. His leg began to bounce nervously under the table. He realized, with a jolt of horror, that he had walked into a minefield. The atmosphere in the tournament hall had shifted from curiosity to electric tension. The whispers in the audience grew louder. "Did you see that sacrifice? Is she crazy? No. Look at the engine evaluation. The computer just swung from 1.5 for black to +2.0 for white. She's winning." Maximilian Vane was sweating. The cool, arrogant rock star was gone. He was running his hands through his bleached hair, tugging at his collar. He burned 10 minutes of his clock on a single move. He tried to salvage the position. He moved his queen to defend. James responded instantly. Bishop to G5, pinning his knight. Vane cursed audibly. The arbiter gave him a warning glance. Every move James made was a hammer blow. She wasn't playing safe chess. She was playing 1960s Soviet attack chess. It was violent, romantic, and mathematically terrifying. In the VIP box, Julian Sterling put down his champagne. He was leaning forward, gripping the railing. "My God," he whispered. She's actually doing it. Back at the board, Vane was crumbling. He looked at James. For the first time, he looked her in the eyes. He saw no fear. He saw a cold, hard abyss. "Who are you?" Vane hissed. "Check," James said, moving her queen. Vane had to move his king. He had no other legal moves. James slid her rook over. Rook to h8. It was a quiet move. No check, no capture. Just a quiet slide of a piece. Vane stared at the board. His eyes widened. He checked every variation. He looked for a block. He looked for an escape square. There was nothing. The quiet move was the nail in the coffin. Unavoidable mate in 3. Vane's hand hovered over his king. He wanted to knock the pieces off the board. He wanted to scream. To lose to a nobody? To a girl? In the first round? It was career suicide. But he was a grandmaster. He knew when he was dead. Slowly, painfully, Maximilian Vane tipped his king over. "I resign," he choked out. The hall erupted. People jumped to their feet. The applause was deafening. It sounded like thunder. James sat frozen. She stared at the fallen king. She had done it. She had beaten the number 8 player in the world. Julian was already rushing down the stairs towards the stage, surrounded by reporters. James stood up, her legs feeling like jelly. Vane stood up too, refusing to shake her hand again. He leaned in close, his face twisted with malice. "You think you won?" Vane whispered, his voice toxic. "You just painted a target on your back. The Russians are watching, darling. They know that style. Do you think your grandfather just disappeared? They killed him. And now that they know who you are, they'll come for you too." Vane stormed off the stage. James stood alone under the hot lights. The joy of victory evaporated, replaced by a sudden, chilling dread. Julian reached her, wrapping an arm around her shoulder, beaming for the cameras. "She's a prodigy," Julian shouted to the press. "The future of chess. Sterling Dynamics is proud to introduce James Jenkins to the world." "Julian," James whispered, grabbing his lapel. "Vane said something. He said the Russians. He said they killed my grandfather." Julian's smile didn't waver for the cameras, but his grip on her shoulder tightened until it hurt. "Smile, James," he muttered through his teeth. "You're a star now. We'll deal with the ghosts later." "But I said smile." Flashbulbs popped, blinding her. James forced a smile, but her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She had won the game, but she had just realized she was a pawn on a much, much larger board. As the reporters shouted questions, "James, how did you learn that gambit?" "James, are you really a waitress?" James looked past the lights, into the darkness of the hall. At the very back, standing near the exit, was a man in a grey trench coat. He wasn't clapping. He was watching her through binoculars. He lowered the binoculars. Even from this distance, James felt the weight of his gaze. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a phone, and made a call. Then he turned and vanished into the shadows. James shivered. The game was over. The war had just begun. The euphoria of the victory against Vane didn't last long. By the time James reached her hotel room at the Bellagio, the adrenaline had soured into nausea. She locked the door and leaned against it, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Vane's words echoed in her mind. "They know who you are. They'll come for you." She walked to the window, looking out at the neon sprawl of Las Vegas. It felt artificial, a city of lights designed to hide the dark. Knock, knock, knock. James froze. It was 2 a.m. "Who is it?" she called out, her voice trembling. "Room service," a muffled voice replied. "Mr. Sterling sent champagne." James hesitated. She hadn't ordered anything, but defying Julian seemed dangerous too. She kept the chain on the door and cracked it open an inch. Standing in the hallway was not a waiter. It was the man in the grey trench coat, the one from the auditorium. James tried to slam the door, but a heavy leather boot blocked it. "Do not scream, James Nikolaevna," the man said. His voice was gravel, accented with the same harsh Russian tones her grandfather used to have. "If I wanted to hurt you, you would already be dead. I am here to save you from the shark. Who are you?" James hissed, pressing her weight against the door. "I am Yuri. I was your grandfather's second in 1985, the man said. Through the crack, he held up an old, faded photograph. It showed two young men standing in Red Square, holding a trophy. One was the man in the hallway, 40 years younger. The other was undeniably Nikolai Volkov. James's grip on the door loosened. She undid the chain and let him in. Yuri limped into the room, checking the corners, closing the blinds. "We do not have much time. Sterling has the floor bugged." "Julian?" James frowned. "Why would he bug my room? He's my sponsor." Yuri laughed, a bitter, barking sound. "He is not your sponsor, little bird. He is a miner, and you are the mine." "I don't understand." Yuri sat on the edge of the bed, looking tired. "Your grandfather was not just a chess player. He was a mathematician for the Soviet military. Before he defected, he created an algorithm, a predictive model for chaotic systems, markets, battlefields, elections. He called it the Glass Horizon. It is worth trillions." James shook her head. Grandpa was a line cook in Brooklyn. He didn't have any millions. "Because he hid the key," Yuri said intensely. "He didn't write the code down. He hid it in the games. He memorized a sequence of chess moves, a specific 64-move game, that, if played and recorded by a modern computer, decodes the encrypted files he stole." Yuri pointed at her. "He taught you the style, James. He taught you the vulgar gambit and the ghost defense because they are parts of the key. Julian Sterling knows this. He doesn't care about the tournament prize money. He wants you to play the sequence." The room spun. It all made sense. The way Julian watched her games, the way he recorded everything, the way he forced her to play aggressively. "He's using me," James whispered. "He is waiting for you to play the final sequence," Yuri said. "If you complete the pattern in the finals tomorrow, his AI will capture it. He will have the code, and once he has the code, he won't need me anymore," James finished. "Or your sister," Yuri added grimly. James felt a cold chill settle in her bones. "Mia. He controls her surgery. If I stop playing, she dies. If I play and give him the code, he discards us." "There is a third option," Yuri said. He reached into his coat and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper with chess notation scrawled on it. Nikolai had a fail-safe, a refutation, a move that breaks the algorithm and destroys the data permanently. But to play it, you will have to sacrifice your queen in the final game. "Sacrifice my queen?" James looked at the paper. "But I'll lose. If I lose the final, Julian won't pay for the surgery." Yuri looked at her with sad, ancient eyes. "It is a choice between a tyrant's promise and a free man's legacy. Julian Sterling never intends to pay, James. Once he has the code, you are a loose end. Your only chance is to destroy his prize and force a draw on your own terms." Before James could answer, the door handle rattled. Someone was using a keycard. "Hide!" Yuri whispered. He moved with surprising speed, slipping into the bathroom and locking the door. The main door swung open. It was Julian. He was flanked by two large security guards. "Who are you talking to?" Julian asked, his eyes scanning the room. He looked agitated. "No one," James said, standing up, trying to stop her hands from shaking. "I was practicing out loud. I do that." Julian walked over to her. He smelled of scotch and expensive cologne, but underneath there was the metallic scent of fear. He grabbed her chin. "Tomorrow is the final," Julian said. "You are playing against Ivan Sokolov, the Russian machine. He is perfect, but you—" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You're going to play the Volkov Immortal. You know the line I'm talking about, the one your grandfather taught you for special occasions." James's heart hammered. He knew. "And if I don't?" she asked. Julian leaned in, his lips brushing her ear. "Then the check to the hospital bounces, and Mia is on the street by noon." He pulled back, patted her cheek, and turned to leave. "Sleep tight, James. Big day tomorrow." As the door clicked shut, James sank to the floor. She looked at the bathroom door where Yuri was hiding. She looked at the chessboard on the table. She was trapped. Checkmate in one. Or was she? She crawled over to the board. She set up the pieces. She looked at the notation Yuri had given her. "The board breathes," her grandfather had said. "If you listen, it will tell you where it hurts." James stared at the kings and queens. Her eyes hardened. She wiped a tear from her cheek. "Okay, Grandpa," she whispered. "Let's break the machine." The grand ballroom of the Bellagio was packed. 2,000 spectators sat in the dark, their faces illuminated by the glow of the giant screens. Millions more were watching online. This was the biggest chess event of the decade. The mystery Waitress versus the Russian world champion. Ivan Sokolov sat across from James like a statue carved from granite. He was 40, bald, and had eyes like ice. He hadn't lost a tournament game in 3 years. James sat perfectly still. She wore a simple white blouse, no jewelry, no makeup. She looked stripped down, raw. In the front row, Julian Sterling sat with his legs crossed, his phone recording, his eyes fixed on James. Next to him sat a team of data analysts with laptops, ready to capture the Volkov code. "Let the game begin," the arbiter announced. Sokolov played white, d4. James responded instantly, knight to f6. The game began fast. Sokolov played a crushing, positional game. The Queen's Gambit. He was suffocating her, taking space, pushing her back. He was the boa constrictor. She was the mouse, but James wasn't playing to survive. She was playing the sequence. Move 10. Bishop to g7. Julian nodded in the front row. Move 15. Castle's king side. The analysts typed furiously. Move 20. Rook to e8. She was following Nikolai's hidden game perfectly. She could feel the rhythm of it. It was a beautiful, complex pattern that led to a forced mate for black. If she played it out, she would win the tournament, and Julian would get his trillions, but she would lose her soul. By move 35, the board was a tempest. James had launched a counterattack. Sokolov looked confused. He hadn't expected this specific line. It was antiquated, bizarre, but effective. James's hand hovered over her queen. This was it. Move 40, the critical junction. If she moved her queen to h4, the code was complete. Julian wins. If she listened to Yuri, she had to play something else. James looked at Julian. He was leaning forward, his mouth slightly open, greed radiating off him like heat. He gave her a subtle nod. "Do it. Save your sister." James looked at the camera. She thought of Mia. She thought of the grandfather who died to keep this secret. "You are not a pawn, James," she told herself. "You are the player." She grabbed her queen. She didn't move it to h4. She slammed it down on e3. "Check!" James shouted, her voice ringing through the silent hall. The crowd gasped. The analysts in the front row froze. Julian jumped to his feet. "What is she doing?" Julian screamed. "That's a blunder! He can take it!" It was a sacrifice. A queen sacrifice. Sokolov stared at the board. He looked at James. He looked at the queen. sitting there, defenseless in the middle of the board. If he took the queen, the code was broken. The sequence was shattered. The algorithm would fail to compile. But if he took the queen, he opened a line for James's bishop, a line that led to a forced draw by perpetual check. Sokolov, the cold machine, looked up at the waitress. A slow smile spread across his face. He respected courage, and he hated Julian Sterling. Sokolov took the queen. The audience screamed. Julian threw his phone on the ground, shattering it. "No!" Julian roared. "No!" James moved her rook. Check. Sokolov moved his king. James moved her rook back. Check. Sokolov moved his king back. "Draw," James said calmly. "Threefold repetition." Sokolov extended his hand. "I accept." The game was over. It was a draw. James hadn't won the tournament, but she hadn't lost. Julian stormed onto the stage, his face purple with rage. He didn't care about the cameras. He didn't care about the crowd. "You stupid girl!" he screamed, grabbing her arm. "You ruined it! You ruined everything! The deal is off! Your sister is dead! Do you hear me? Dead!" The microphone on the table was still on. Julian's voice boomed through the speakers, echoing in the hall and on the live stream. "The deal is off! Your sister is dead!" The crowd went silent. The threat hung in the air, naked and brutal. James stood up. She looked at Julian, then pointed to the back of the room. "I don't think so, Julian." Julian turned around. Marching down the center aisle were 4 FBI agents, led by Yuri. But Yuri wasn't wearing his trench coat. He was wearing a badge. "Julian Sterling," Yuri shouted. "You are under arrest for securities fraud, corporate espionage, and extortion." Julian stumbled back. "What? This is a setup. We've been tracking your attempts to access the Volkov servers for 2 years, Yuri said, climbing the stairs. "We just needed you to admit you were blackmailing her. And thanks to the live stream," Yuri pointed to the cameras, "you just confessed to the world." Julian looked at James. You worked with them?" "I made a better move," James said coldly. "Checkmate." As the agents handcuffed the billionaire and dragged him away, the crowd erupted into applause, not for a chess game, but for justice. Sokolov, the Russian champion, was still sitting at the table. He looked at the board, then at James. "You could have won, you know," Sokolov said quietly. "With the other move, you would have been world champion." James looked at the exit, where Yuri was giving her a thumbs up. She knew that part of the FBI's deal was full protection for Mia and the surgery covered by the state as a witness protection asset. "I don't want to be the champion of his world," James smiled, taking off her ID badge and dropping it on the king. "I just want to be James." She walked off the stage, down the aisle, and out the heavy double doors. The flashbulbs popped. The crowd cheered. But James didn't look back. She had a plane to catch. Her sister was waking up soon. Epilogue 6 months later. The park in Queens was noisy with the sound of kids playing and traffic humming nearby. James sat on a concrete bench, a cheap magnetic chessboard set up between her and an old man in a windbreaker. "Knight to F3, the old man said, moving his piece. "You're getting slow, James." "I'm letting you win, Mr. Henderson," James laughed, sipping her coffee. "Hey, James." James turned. Running across the grass was a teenage girl with short hair, looking healthy and vibrant. It was Mia. "Come on," Mia shouted. "The movie starts in 20 minutes. "I'm coming," James called back. She looked down at the board. She was a waitress again. She worked double shifts. She lived in a small apartment. She wasn't rich. She wasn't famous. But she was free. She knocked over her own king, conceding the game. "You win, Mr. Henderson," she smiled. "I have somewhere to be." She grabbed her bag and ran toward her sister, her laughter lost in the wind. Just another face in the crowd, invisible and invincible. And that is the incredible story of how a waitress checkmated a billionaire, not just on the board, but in real life. It reminds us that intelligence isn't about how much money you have, but about how you use the pieces you're given. James sacrificed her queen to save her sister, proving that the greatest victory is protecting the ones you love. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow and tells me you want more stories like this. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a drama. What would you have done in James's position? Would you have taken the money or played the draw? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.